You're tuned into the Weekend Jazz Update with Joshua Silva. On this week's show, it's all about the life and times and best hits of Keith Jarret. Keith Jarret is a leading jazz composer and pianist of this day and age. He's particularly well known for his solo performances and improvisations. He's received several accolades for recordings as a solo artist, also as part of his trio, the Keith Jarret Trio. Jarret started out taking piano classes when he was just 3 years old. By 7, he was making stage appearances. In the mid-60s, he started touring and collaborating alongside leading jazz artists like Chet Baker and Lee Morgan. Then in 1968, he formed his own trio, Keith Jarret Trio, alongside Charlie Haydn and Paul Motian. He attained widespread popularity for his improvisation technique that featured a mix of jazz, classical, gospel, blues and folk music. In 2008, Keith Jarret was inducted into the Downbeat Hall of Fame. So that was some insight into the biography and best hits of Keith Jarret. More details coming up. Also coming up, some trending festival and album news. Stay tuned to the Weekend Jazz Update with Joshua Silva to find out more. We'll be right back after some music. And welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Joshua Silva. On this week's show, it's all about the life and times and best hits of Keith Jarret. During this hour, we're going to be talking about his biography. Keith Jarret was born on May 8, 1945. He's a leading jazz composer and pianist of this day and age. He's particularly well known for his solo performances and improvisations. He's received several accolades for recordings as a solo artist, also as part of his trio, the Keith Jarret Trio. In 2003, Jarret was the recipient of the Solo Music Prize. Jarret started out taking piano classes when he was just 3 years old. By 7, he was making stage appearances. In 1962, he performed a 2-hour series of original compositions with no prior training in the art of composition or orchestration. In the mid-60s, he started touring and collaborating alongside leading jazz artists like Chet Baker and Lee Morgan. Then in 1968, he formed his own trio, the Keith Jarret Trio, alongside Charlie Haydn and Paul Motian. In 1971, Dewey Redman joined the trio and they began performing under the name The American Quartet. Throughout the 80s and 90s, he made several iconic performances, most notably alongside Miles Davis and at solo concerts like the Cologne concert in Germany. His album release of that performance was later featured on Time magazine as one of the leading albums of that year. Since the 70s, Jarret started seeing more and more success as both a group leader and solo artist in both jazz and classical genres. He also attained widespread popularity for his improvisation technique that featured a mix of jazz, classical, gospel, blues and folk music. In 1990, he suffered from chronic fatigue syndrome and gave up touring and performing for a while. Then in 1998, he returned to the music scene. He formed a new trio featuring himself, Gary Peacock and Jack DeJohnette. They toured together till 2014. Jarret said his music was primarily inspired by the philosophy of George Girdsey, one of the leading philosophers of the 20th century. In 1980, he composed a tribute album to the great philosopher called Sacred Hymns. In 2008, Keith Jarret was inducted into the Downbeat Hall of Fame. And welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Joshua Silva. On this week's show, it's about the life and times and best hits of Keith Jarret. Now it's time for some trending album news. Trombonist Reggie Watkins is out with a new album that's a tribute to his hometown of Pittsburgh. The album is called Rivers and is set for release on BYNK Records on March 28th. The title of the track was inspired from the 3 famous Pittsburgh rivers, the Allegheny, Monongahela, and Ohio. Mainly, the songs in this album are a tribute to Watkins' various inspirations and collaborators. The opening track, Blues for 3 Days, is dedicated to fellow musicians David Gibson and Steve Davis. Ocularity is a tribute to Ornette Coleman and Don Cherry. And Blue 6 is a tribute to Thelonious Monk and Jimmy Nepper. There's also a tribute to the city of Shanghai on the song Shanghai Strut. A beautiful tribute to the river culture of Pittsburgh is seen on the song Meditations, which is an ebb and flow to the melody to symbolize the flow of river water. Watkins says he always had a deep connection to the jazz scene and the people of the city of Pittsburgh. He grew up touring and performing alongside local bands in Pittsburgh, and the songs in this album tell the story of that musical journey. For more information, please check out www.reggiewatkinsmusic.com. So that was some trending album news on the Weekend Jazz Update with Joshua Silva. We're going for a short break. We'll be right back after that. When we come back, we're going to be talking about some of Keith Jarret's best albums of all time. Stay tuned. And welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Joshua Silva. On this week's show, it's all about the life and times and best hits of Keith Jarret. During this hour, we're going to be talking about some of his best albums of all time. Here's a quick recap of what's coming up. The first one's called Facing You. This one was released in 1972. This one was Jarret's debut solo piano album. The songs were completely improvised. The pieces in the album reflect a broad range of styles, emotions and tones. Another album called Expectations, also released in 1972. Most of the tracks here are hard bop songs after the styles of John Coltrane and Ornette Coleman. Jarret plays several instruments here apart from the piano. He plays the saxophone, the tonga, a type of oriental drum kit, and steel drums and bass. The next album is called Belonging. This one was released in 1974. This one's a tour de force in Jarret's compositions. One focus of the album was spontaneity and group interplay. A very vibrant, emotional album. The next album is called The Budapest Concert, released in 2020. This album features a great live performance by Jarret's band at a concert in Budapest in 2016. The moods and styles vary from contemplative balladry to fast-paced boogie to elegant chamber music to dazzling blues and folk songs. So that was some insight into what's coming up during this hour, and this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashani Silva. We're going for a short break. We'll be right back after that. Stay tuned. And welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashani Silva. On this week's show, it's all about the life and times and best hits of Keith Jarret. During this hour, we're going to be talking about some of his best albums of all time. The first one's called Facing You. This one was released in 1972. This was Jarret's debut solo piano album and had sparks of things to come in later years. The songs were completely improvised. The pieces in the album reflect a broad range of styles, emotions, and tones. The opening track is a masterclass in spontaneous improvisation. The song starts off with crashing chords, then builds into a soulful boogie-woogie vamp style full of beautiful flourishes. The rest of the songs alternate between jazz, gospel, and classical. The best word for this album is dreamlike, smooth flowing pieces that are also unpredictable. Another album called Expectations, also released in 1972. In the early 70s, Jarret would alternate between American and European bands. They were known as his American and European quartets. The reason was twofold. It enabled his overseas tours to be conducted with a lot more ease. Also, his performances between the different groups allowed for a lot of variety and creativity and chemistry. His recordings with the American groups often showcase solo performances. Also, they give us an insight into his playing style back then, merely hard bop after the styles of John Coltrane and Ornette Coleman. In this album, Jarret also varies in terms of instruments he performs. At one point, it's a saxophone alongside D.B. Redman. Also, he plays the tonga, that's a type of oriental drum kit, also steel drums alongside Paul Motian. At other times, he engages in wild double bass alongside Charlie Haydn. So, Expectations was a cross-section of his style back then, wild and innovative. The musicians alternate in duets and in various tracks. There's also Sam Brown on rock fusion guitar and Airto Moreira on Latin percussion. The next album is called Belonging. This one was released in 1974. This one's a tour de force in Jarret's compositions. Some of his best compositions make an appearance here. There's a soulful classic, Long As You Know You're Living Yours, and a cheery song called The Wind Up. The focus on this album was spontaneity and group interplay. The style is very laid back and relaxed. One of the highlights of the album was the beautiful piano and saxophone interplay between John Garbrick and Keith Jarret. He would alternate between bluesy solos to more laid-back tunes to complement Jarret's ballad playing. In this album, we get a glimpse of all these moods and shades encased in a beautiful sonic landscape. There's also the rhythm section that keeps things moving along, featuring Paul Danielson and John Christensen. A very vibrant, emotional album. The next album is called The Budapest Concert, released in 2020. This album features a great live performance by Jarret's band at a concert in Budapest in 2016. The album starts off with some wild improvisation-based songs. The moods and the styles vary from contemplative balladry to fast-paced boogie to elegant chamber music to dazzling blues and folk songs. The takes on the songs make them vastly different than the originals. Everything is kept fresh and unique. And welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashani Silva. On this week's show, it's all about the life and times and best hits of Keith Jarret. Now for some trending album news. Bob James and Dave Koz are rising stars in the jazz scene, and they've just released a debut album called Just Us. It's going up for release on Koz Entertainment on March 7th. The two musicians have topped the Billboard charts with their music, and this album is no exception. It features piano and saxophone duets by the two artists, and covers a broad range of music from their own compositions to reimagined versions of great jazz classics. The idea for the album unfolded while the two artists were performing on a cruise ship on Seattle. They said they wanted to give the attendees a souvenir of that concert, so they began to record a mashup of some of their best performances from that tour. In time, the idea for a full-length album unfolded. Some of the highlights from the album include the inspirational New Hope, a dreamy classical song called Procia, and a romantic French ballad Rue de Rivoli. The two artists say that they decided to make it just a saxophone and piano duet to bring out a special style to the music. The point was to fill the space left by the absence of drums and bass with more piano interludes. So they're also set to promote their album in a live tour that touches down in Chicago, Minneapolis, Seattle, and more. For more information, please check out www.justusalbum.com. So that was some trending album news on the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashani Silva. We're going for a short break. We'll be right back after that. When we come back, we're going to be talking about more of Keith Jarret's best albums of all time. Stay tuned.